Well, here's a straightforward request. This person asks, can you show how to paint a carpet texture? Well, this will have variations on it you might not believe. Well, we've got lots of kinds of carpet and different ways we will see carpet. I've just given you just a few examples here. Texture in the carpet here, texture in the carpet here, different texture here. I even have a design here. This one's maybe similar in some ways here, and then we have a carpet's made of two different kinds of texture there. So how in the world am I going to teach you how to paint texture in carpet? Well, I'm going to teach you how to look and how to resolve the problem of what you're seeing. So let's first of all take this down because I want to focus the attention right here. All textures that you see in reality are tiny, tiny little value contrast. If you look real close right in here, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. This is a close-up, of course, of a more textured carpet than some of those that we were looking at. And if you look, you've got just thousands of little tiny, tiny value contrasts. But the way those contrasts are the length of each of those little sets of contrasts, the length of the one that we could see, the one that's in light, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. That's what I'm talking about. And the way they're turned give us textures. And a lot of textures, just random textures, like textures that you'll see in a carpet that has a longer nap to it. Is that what you call it? I don't know. So you've got that. Then you've got whether it's in light or in shadow. You've also got how are you looking at it? How much distance is there between you and the carpet? Now, if you'll notice in this, we have a little bit of distance. We can see the pattern of this as larger sections, the largest sections that are creating the pattern, and they get so smaller as they go in the distance. Not only that, but what you see closer to you is the sharper, or that has a deeper, or darker, or more contrasted texture. Then as it goes in the distance, the texture gets less and less. And if you look at the texture of a lawn, a mowed lawn, which is kind of akin to the texture of a carpet, up close you can see defined texture, but in the distance, if it's a really long lawn, in the distance it'll just almost be smooth. So we have all those things we're dealing with. So learn how to look. Now, when we're painting such a thing, if we look for the overall value pattern first, then we can add those textures to that value pattern. Now, this is true with all textures, regardless of what they are. If you see the value pattern first and you block in that value pattern, then you can work the textures in there. And I'll show you just one method. One, it's always true that blocking in first and then laying the textures on top of the value of block in will give you the truest reading of textures, but some other things you have to watch for too. So what I'm going to do here, very briefly, looking at this, I'm just going to show you one approach to how you might create the textures that we're seeing in that carpet. So the carpet is obviously a very dark, it's a yellow green that is really desaturated. So I'll just bring my sap green over here on the palette. So it's not going to take much of this. And it's very, very desaturated. This sap green is already pretty desaturated. But to get it a little bit more desaturated, that's a yellow green. So desaturate, I've got to talk about color a little bit. Red violet is the complement of yellow green. So what I'll do here is I'll just mix some red violet into this yellow green and get it more desaturated. Now, it's not that I'm necessarily trying to match the exact color I see there, but just to get close, and that probably does it right there. I took away pretty much most of the yellow green out of that pile of color. I'm going to pull away that red violet now, get it out of the way because it served its purpose. Now the values that we're seeing here, let's do a little bit of planning before we actually start to do the demonstration. So what I have here is about as dark as of this yellow-green, desaturated yellow-green as you can get. By the way, I have, if you can see those vertical lines there, don't let that bother you. That's the end of my roll of canvas, and I didn't realize that was there. I didn't realize that texture was there until I saw the lights on it this morning. All right, see how very, very dark that is. Very, very dark. So in order to get that lighter, we're going to add white, and here's why. Normally, if you're going to get yellow green, this depth of yellow green and this desaturated yellow green, if it were leaning a little bit more toward yellow and had more of the yellow in it, we would use a combination of yellow and white. But the white itself, I think, is going to be sufficient for that. And it's not going to require a lot of white, you see, in this. You see how that feels so neutral? It's pretty close to what we have right there. Might need to add just a little bit of yellow back into that, but I'm not really worried about that. I just want to get the textures. So I'm going to get a gradation. Normally I would build a value line, but for this demonstration, just want to show you how the principle works. All right, so let me get a paper towel here and clear off the palette knife. Now, if I'm starting like right back in here, you see where that's very, very dark. We see some very subtle gradation in value. And so as blocking in, what I want to do is to show that as subtle gradation in value. So it's very close, you see. And I see that the pattern of what I see is dark and what I see is light. I see a pattern in front moving more in this direction. Now this is the way you look at it. You look for pattern and you look at it in a squint without seeing the obvious texture that's there. And so we can get just a slight gradation now. I'll move back into the dark. And I'm just going to get a gradation here that moves across. Very similar to what I'm seeing there. In some places it gets lighter as it goes back into the distance there. And that does get a little, I'm not worried about it. I'm just looking at the value. Color changes a little bit. It goes in the distance there. But I'm just showing you the value. And you see that as it moves out of light, out of shadow, in this light that's coming obviously from another room or a window or something onto it there, that gradates into a lighter value. So just to show you how that works as it's moving into the distance. So if you look, you're going to get your information for painting. You're going to get your information from what you're looking at, not from what someone tells you, or not from a formula. There is no formula that's going to tell you how to see every single thing there is to see. So the best thing to do is to learn what to look for and how to look at it. So what we're looking for here, first of all, is we're looking for value gradation. And if you just squint your eyes now, close one eye and pull the eyelid down on the other one, we see a gradation, a gradual gradation that goes from very, very dark to about almost a middle value there. And I'm just going to show something like that right here. That's what I mean by block in. Block in, different people have different definitions of block in. We see some variation in value there too. Different people have different definitions of what block in means. My working definition of block in is we're placing general values and colors where we see them. That's all. We're not placing details in a block in, but you're placing general values and colors where you see them. So I'm just want to get this gradually getting a little bit lighter. And then get just a little bit more, get a little bit more light and get those variations in there as I see them. So a little bit lighter as it goes right across here. And I see now. Now, if you'll see the little pattern there, see that little pattern of the darker darks, pick up a little bit, not much, on the tip of your brush. If you see a pattern like that, where there's a variation, the best way to do that is get the value there, the gradation first, and then come just a value that's very slightly darker, and just paint it in, work it in to what you have there. Let's see if I can get that, something like that. I'm going back in the dark here. Let's get this gradation a little bit moving more in the direction we see that moving. You see that very, all right. Now you see I already have pretty much a pattern very close to the pattern I'm seeing there. Now the next issue is what happens, how are you going to get that texture? The textures that you make should not vary in value very much at all from what you're seeing there. So if I wanted, for example, if I see a texture there, and I realize that the tip of my brush, or that the bristles of my brush, if I push them up, kind of like you would a fan brush, if I push those bristles up into the paint, I can make a texture. Now, that's one way to allow the brush to make the texture, asking yourself, what do you know that your brush will do? And the best way to do that is where you see darks, like we have here. Get a dark, then create a dark, or pull a dark on the tip of your brush that is just a little bit darker than what you have here. Not much, but a little bit darker than you have here. And give it a little bit of push. See, like that? And we can then move into, and where we see the very dark, where it's in shadow, we see the very dark, we can just allow the tips of the brush, the tips of the bristles of the brush to create that texture just by pushing it down and allowing the bristles to create the texture. As it goes back there, I will then get that a little bit lighter. I want the value to be just either a little bit lighter or a little bit darker. Where the value, you can see on those textures where the value sits on top, the lighter value sits on top, then I'll pick up a lighter value and I'll let it sit just above that texture, just above that previous texture that I made. See, like this. And I'll come down here. Now I want this to be just a one value lighter or a half value lighter than this, to be able to get right on top of that and turn the brush. As I see this turning here, I turn my brush in that same direction. And this way you can then create something that is going to look pretty much like the texture that you're looking at. And get that just a little bit more as I'm moving up here. A little bit lighter, but not, it shouldn't, all those textures should not be the same value. I'm going to work a little bit faster here now. The texture should be just the textures themselves, the colors that you use for creating the textures should be just a little bit lighter or a little bit darker than the blocky in area. You can see it like sort of like this. Now, another little thing that we can do, depending on what the texture of something is that you might find that you know of something that will make a texture similar to what you're looking at. We have to use our imaginations for this one. But sometimes, like this texture here, for example, or other textures that we see in carpets, well, look, we could say ourselves ragged. Well, artists over the centuries have used all kinds of things to make textures. And we think that all of the master artists used only brushes. Well, they didn't. Remember, the old masters didn't have the variation of brushes we have anyway. So they had to use their imaginations. And sometimes you can make textures you need just by taking something like a Kleenex and kind of gather it together. Make yourself a little brush. See, like that? And then, here's the trick of that. We have to have enough paint. Whoops. we have to have enough paint, and we have to have the value of the paint that we need. So we develop our values on the palette. Let me create quite a bit of paint to show you that. And what I want right here, for example, I want a value. Okay, I want a value that's a little bit darker, but not quite. A little bit darker than the value I'm seeing right here. I mean, a little bit lighter. You have a little bit lighter or a little bit darker. A little bit lighter or a little bit darker. And now, what I will do is I will just sweep this back and forth in this paint. If I push down really, really hard, it's going to stick together. So I just need to kind of weave that around now. And I can just use this in a little pattern like this, you see, to create that texture. It's not cheating. Anything that you use as a tool when you're painting that helps you create the images you're trying to create is not cheating. Sometimes we have to make our own tools. Sometimes the brushes aren't sufficient for what we're trying to do, but it's not the tool. It's the way you use the tool and the way you use color and value as you're with that tool. Now, if you just take something like that and just dot it all over the place randomly, it will be kind of hokey, and I wouldn't call it cheating. I'd just call it hokey. All right, so let's try just a little bit of that again to show you what I'm talking about here. As I'm going further back, just a little bit further back, see if we could do something like this. And then that begins to look like the texture, a little bit like the texture. See, not the same pattern, but it might look very much like the texture we see there. So, a Kleenex that is not one of those expensive kind that has that cream and stuff in it, but one that's kind of maybe a cheap Kleenex that's kind of stiff on your nose, kind of rough on your nose. It makes a wonderful tool for creating textures that you would not necessarily be able to get with your brush. Now, a lot of people buy these specialty brushes. They're supposed to be made for doing different kinds of textures. You don't need that stuff. Make your textures as you need them. And the way I like to think about that is I will simply look at something that I'm trying to create. If I'm trying to create the texture, and I'll simply say, what do I know that will give me that? What kind of mark does that look like? What do I know that will give me that? And it doesn't matter what I come up with. What matters is that I use it convincingly, that I'm using the principles of light and shadow as I see them. And you will find be surprised what you might come up with. Give yourself a whole new toolkit. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.